Welcome, everyone, to the Inclusion Catalyst podcast. I'm your host for today's episode, Josh Miller, the founder of Josh Miller Ventures and the co-founder and CEO of Ideas xLab. I am a white androgynous man with long wavy brown hair. I have blue eyes, and I'm wearing a black shirt and a silk wearable photos print featuring gold, blue, and black image I took while running the trails in Colorado. Visible in the background is a white table, a gold lamp, and white and brown built-in bookshelves and drawers. As a queer changemaker and a public speaker, photographer, and outdoor explorer, I really believe that being visible and sharing our stories can shift culture and enhance people's well-being. And that is what brings us together today. With our special guest, Marija Abney, we'll be delving into the topic of covering, which I define as downplaying, hiding, or filtering parts of yourself at work, with different social groups, at school, and with family. And through my work over the past few years and research done by organizations like Deloitte and UCLA Williams Institute, we've seen that everyone from women of color to straight white men to LGBTQ plus folks to people with disabilities and beyond have all named different ways that they've covered parts of themselves and their identities through different realms of life. And if you want to delve into more of those interviews and work, you can go to www.joshmiller.ventures. So like I shared in the last episode, covering the queer parts of who I was as a young professional had a real impact on me. And through interviews and workshops, I've heard from people who covered their disability at work, who didn't mention time with grandkids over the weekend to hide their age, who hid having a same-sex partner, who changed how they dressed, talked, and even did their hair due to cultural norms in the workplace. And so maybe you're familiar with the term code switching that would fall under the broader covering umbrella. And so our goals with these conversations is to help people understand what covering is, its impact, and to think critically about how you can uncover your value across areas of life and the impact that you can have in work and beyond, not only for you, but for those around you and future generations. So with that as our grounding for our conversations today, let's get to know our guest, Marija Abney. So Marija is a community organizer, the arts curator at the Soapbox Presents, a Broadway performer, and actress who starred in movies including both Black Panther films and Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. I had the pleasure of meeting Marija at a Mellon Foundation grantee convening in 2022, where we had a conversation about living with less fear and the role our stories play in our work and growth as people. So I'm really excited for today's conversation. So with that, welcome, Marija.
Thank you very much. Firstly, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to begin this conversation with you and to talk about covering and the ways it affects our life. I am Marija Abney. I am a Black woman. I have long, small, red-tipped braids. I'm wearing big hoop earrings and a color-blocked black and white unzipped sweater. And in the background is present, big, colorful, they're actually juju hats, which is a ceremonial African hat that is hung on my wall in melon, yellow, and aqua. And I have cactus to my left.
I love that background.
It's
Visually, it is like really
artist.
compelling.
Yes, it definitely screams artist. Yeah, so a little bit about my background. I'm from South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina. I currently live in New York, and I have lived here for 18, oh no, has it been 19 years now? Wow,
It's
that's
amazing how fast time can fly.
madness. I live in Harlem. I moved to New York to pursue my BFA at Ailey, the Ailey School and Fordham University. So I have a BFA in dance. I have an MA in performance studies that I got from NYU. I have a certificate. I went to acting school. I went to an acting conservatory for 2 years as well. So I'm certified in Meisner training from William Esper. And you spoke about my career, some Broadway, some film and TV. And I find myself spending a significant amount of my time doing for community, working for community, serving community with the organization I founded, the Soapbox Presents. And the Soapbox Presents is a platform for Black and Brown expression. We build community by taking to the streets and celebrating the brilliance of Black and Brown people through the performing arts.
When I first learned at the convening about what the Soapbox Presents is doing, how you all are bringing community together, activating and kind of reclaiming spaces and celebrating heritage. It's really impactful to see how the community is owning that and owning the movement and really coming out to celebrate and support that. And so, as I was thinking, as we talk about the overarching theme of covering, but also, like you mentioned in the past conversation, what is it like to live with less fear? And fear can, can often come from the how we grow up, the messages we get, some of the things, the environment that surrounds us. And so I wonder, like, as I reached out and as we were talking about the term covering, just in general, what were some of the feelings or emotions that came up for you?
Yeah, with what you were saying, kind of in the intro to this conversation, covering is a less common version of this concept we have of code switching. Code switching is something that is just that we just do. As a Black woman, it is something that is inherent in everything that I do and has been since I was a little girl. I can remember going to ballet school when I was 3, and I always all everybody at my ballet school, all of the little girls were white, and they had long, straight blonde hair, or they were brunettes, and I had natural hair. So I would get in trouble for I would go to the water fountain and I would try to wet my hair to slick it back. And I had a relaxer at the time, so when my roots would grow out, my hair would you could see this little natural puff underneath, and then it would go straight. But I found myself trying to look like my then peers. By slicking my hair back. Even as a child, I was covering, and I of course, didn't have the language for it. I just wanted to be accepted, and I wanted to look like everybody else, and I didn't understand why my bun wasn't slick and pretty like everybody else's. I remember standing in the back of class because I was brown. I remember, just as a kid, what you internalize, and then what you as an adult have to then unpack. I love what I do in Harlem. I love what I do for community because it works against all of that. It celebrates Black people and all that we have done and the brilliance of all that we have done and our cultural contributions, not just to American culture, but to global culture, because Black culture and American culture is the greatest export of America. To say that, it's an understatement to say that Black Americans have impacted global culture. Our culture is the greatest export of America. So I love that I'm able to take to the streets and celebrate that. I'm able to show little brown girls and little brown boys what we look like in all of our forms, and to celebrate the brilliance that is. One of my favorite images of us activating on the street is, we work with this incredible bassist. Her name is India Owens. For little kids to engage with and see this beautiful Black woman on this bass, on an upright bass, killing it, and to see this for the first time, that to me is magical. And then the impact of that, the ripple of that is huge, and there's no way to measure that. So I'm very thankful for what I do in the community.
I wonder, as you described some of those examples from growing up, and
Mm-hmm.
then kind of talked about how that can then permeate in different ways into adulthood. If you can pinpoint some examples, when did the realization of that kind of come to the fore for you? And then what has, the unpacking of that, or thinking about how, like you were talking about, how you're creating these moments to change what the future looks like for the next generation, for them to imagine something different. Kind of what was the arc of that like for you?
Mm-hmm. One of the examples that for me was kind of the most painful growing up, and then the least overt, I think. My dad used to tell me to tuck in my bottom lip. So he would always suggest that I tuck it inside my mouth a bit, because my bottom lip is a bit fuller than my top lip. He would suggest that I stay out of the sun. He did not prefer when I wore my hair curly. He always wanted my hair straight. As an adult, as a child, that was painful, because to me, it was my dad saying to me, "Oh, I don't like the way you look." As an adult, I realized, okay, this is my dad trying to trying to improve my proximity to whiteness by altering my physical as much as he could. Still, with that understanding, it was painful. As I began to process that and situate that within my understanding of his background and his trauma, this is my dad trying to actually protect me in a way. It is backwards, and it's based on his trauma. It's based on his trauma and his father's trauma. And, we grew up in the Confederate South. I've heard stories of crosses burning on lawns. My dad has seen crosses burning on lawns. So I can only feel anger towards him to a certain degree because you only know what you know. Your experiences, your knowledge is based on your experiences. And you've only experienced what you've only lived in your life. So I can't, as an adult, I've come to understand those things very, very differently. And I've come to celebrate them. I love my lips. I love that my bottom lip is fuller than my top. And I paint my lips all sorts of colors. I wear black lipstick and I wear aqua and turquoise. And I love that about myself, but it's definitely something I had to come into. I love spending the summer in the sun and getting brown and red. And I love that I can be bald headed. I can have braids down to my butt. I can have a fro. I can wear it straight. I can do it. I love that. That's part of who I am. It's greatly informed my coming into Black womanness. And I've had to come into both of those things separately and together, my Blackness and my being a woman. In terms of what I do, Soapbox came out of, it was a call from community. We started right after George Floyd was murdered because my community needed something. And that, as an artist, as a creator, this was my answer to what community needed. We needed a place to not only protest and mourn the lives that were lost, but we needed a place to gather to remember joy as well. So that was my answer. My answer was, okay, this is what I can do in this moment for my community. And also, I work with a lot of Black men, a lot of Black male artists, and to be able to do that and to be able to celebrate them at a time where Black men were too often being struck down and too often being told and treated as if they were less than they are, that means a lot to me. So being able to, what I do directly acts against what we're told that we are and how we are treated as less than.
I was talking to a friend recently about parent relationships and some that we build up in this image that our parents, especially when we're younger, are supposed to be quote unquote perfect, right? They're supposed to be able to just be the person that we need them to be. And we were having a conversation about recognizing that, just like you were saying, generationally, one parent did the best that they could based on the parent before them. And so being able to to come to that acknowledgement and really kind of re-examine what that relationship looks like of human to human and both being imperfect and operating in the best way that we can be really resonates. That was a conversation that I was just having with someone. One of the things that I've really enjoyed about seeing for your work is how the arts are woven throughout all of the different ways that you're stepping into and challenging assumptions and creating change in the world. And so I wonder, through the different roles you've played, whether that's been on Broadway or in movies or the inhabiting these different characters, has that, as part of your process, helped to shift how you see yourself and the space you can take up and the power that you have as a Black woman, as a creative, as someone who can help to create change in community?
Absolutely. I think one of the strongest things that my journey in the arts, specifically my career as an artist, kind of excluding my career or my burgeoning career as a producer, one of the things my career as an artist has taught me is to stand firm in my no. And what that means. I've been fortunate in that a lot of the shows that I have done have been linked to Blackness in some way. Part of that is not accidental because, when I was on Broadway, I was bald-headed, or I had designs cut in my hair, and I carry a decent amount of muscle on my body, which means that my archetype doesn't necessarily fit into like a lily white chorus. So I'm not the traditional chorus girl that would be featured on Broadway. So the cultural content of the shows that I have been a part of, Lion King, After Midnight, the Cher show less so, those shows have been tied to blackness. Recently, it's a struggle. It's still quite a challenge because largely casting directors and those who are deciding what roles I play, they don't look like me. So you're not just dealing with how you see yourself, you're dealing with how someone else sees you. And that's something totally different. That's a you know, you've talked about whose imagination are you working in. That's now requiring me to work in somebody else's imagination and somebody else's perception of me. Um, I have to play that game to some degree. For instance, I love rocking my bald head, but when I have that look, I'm offered very narrow roles. Even though to me, like, black women, we're bald, like that's not an unusual look for us. And it doesn't communicate to us, it doesn't communicate what it does to someone else. It doesn't imply anything about me other than I choose to wear my hair bald. But for casting directors, it's something different. So I have to play the game a little bit. And it's frustrating because it limits it limits my ability to express myself, and it does at times infringe upon how I would choose to live out in the world and how I would choose to navigate out in the world. Standing in my no, a couple weeks ago, I had to have a conversation with my team, with my agents and my manager about color blind versus color conscious casting. There was this show a play actually, that was auditioning, and it was set in the 60s, and they were interested in doing a color blind version of this show, i.e., this show was originally written for all white women as the leads, and now they were interested in including more diversity in this show. I'm here for including more diversity. I'm not here for being blind to certain circumstances. If anything is going to be about being in the US in the 60s as a black woman, no matter where you were in the 60s as a black woman, you were dealing with civil rights. That's just what it was. If that play does not mention that, if race does not come up in that play, then that play is doing a disservice to black people and doing a disservice to the story of what was happening in the US at that time. So I say all that to say, being where I am in my career today has allowed me to say no and to stand firm in that no. So we gave that a pass. I'm very proud of my ability to say no, and the privilege. There's a privilege in that too. I know that through the work that I've done, I have set myself up, it's a financial thing as well, financially, so that I can say no. I don't have to be, it's not a matter of, oh, I need to take this job because I need to pay rent. I'm okay. So I recognize that there's a privilege in my being able to say no. But as a black woman, I'm very proud of my ability and my capacity to say no. Thank you for the offer, but this is not where I am in this time in my life.
That is, like you said, it's a privilege, but it's also wonderful to know that, like that, based on the career that you've built and the work that you've been able to do, that you are there, and that you also have an agent and a team of people who can actively participate in that conversation to say, what is our strategy? What does it look like when we are stepping into these projects? How do they embody the values that we have? And how do they reinforce the stories that are important to us to tell, or don't reinforce those stories? And so, like you said, this one's a pass, and we're going to look at the next one.
How significant and how supportive my team is. My managers, the lead agents at my agency are white, and my manager is white. They are so supportive, down to my agent. When we're talking about this particular situation, my agent said to me, I'm sure they're going to deal with it somehow, but to be honest, the amount of educating that you're going to have to do in the room, in comparison to the amount that you could be getting paid, it's not worth it. So I suggest we say no. And for my team to be not only allied to me in that way, but we use this word accomplice because it's more active than allied. For them to be my accomplices in that way is amazing. To have to have that is amazing. To have a team that has my back in so many ways is so helpful.
Yeah, that type of support, that can be a game changer. And I like the differentiation you make. You haven't gotten to meet my team member Hannah with Ideas xLab and Unknown Project. She couldn't be at the Mellon convening, but when we do a lot of our work, that's part of the spectrum that we're talking to people about, of what are your points of entry as someone, whether it's in the fight for Black Lives Matter or supporting the LGBTQ plus community. There are different roles and there are different levels at which that role creates impact and supports people. And
Mhm.
so that's an important differentiator to have. And I'm glad to hear that you have that type of team.
It's been amazing. It's been amazing.
As you've been able to have those conversations, and I'd love to bridge it into the Soapbox Presents a little bit more, but for you, you brought up that question of whose imagination are you working in generally, but for you, what does imagining the future through the prism of work that you're doing look like? And then how does something like the Soapbox Presents really embody what you're pushing toward?
hmm And thinking specifically about the imagination question, I think that's a very interesting question. That when you sent that question, I was like, okay, that's I'm gonna spend some time. I'm gonna think on that. I think for me, I have to. It's dual. I have to simultaneously realize the reality that we are in, and for me, that is also recognizing what happens if I don't act, which is living in somebody else's imagination. If I don't participate in building something new, something different, if I don't execute what's in my imagination, then I'm allowing somebody else's imagination to become the reality. That to me is a very dangerous situation. I am unwilling to be a non-active participant in my own future. I'm unwilling to be a non-active participant in my niece's future and in the future of any prospective children that I may have or you may have. That's too much of a risk for me. It's very important for me in all aspects of my career to actively participate by building. If you want to see something changed, do it, change it, participate in changing it. I work with a lot of jazz musicians, and something that I realized during COVID is that they were getting they weren't getting the pay that I would like them. They weren't getting paid their worth. And historically, Black and brown jazz musicians and jazz musicians in general have been underpaid. Okay, so what can I, as a creator, do to change the landscape? So one of the pillars of the Soapbox Presents is making sure Black and brown artists get paid their worth. It isn't enough for me to say this system is not fair. No. What am I doing to actively change the system? Even if that means literally starting on your corner of the world. And what I built, what we built, the Soapbox Presents, the box, literally the stage that we stand on, was built in the backyard of the brownstone that I live in. Where we do most of our performances, it's in front of my house. It's on the stoop in front of my house. So for me, it's very important to start to activate my imagination, to not allow my imagination to stay in this imaginary realm. No, bring what you see to life. If you see a problem, if you want something changed, what are you actively doing to change it? In the smallest ways, and we're thinking both micro and macro, changing the landscape, but also starting small to do that in whatever way that you can. I think I will always, the goal is always changing, and there are always things that you see that you want to change. So I will always simultaneously live in the reality and work in the imagination, because everything starts with the imagination. Everything starts with, you got to see it differently before you can make it different. So for me, I'll always be both here and here. That's like a dual action thing for me, I guess. I'll simultaneously be in both realms.
I think that connection to imagination, one, the active role you talk about of if you aren't actively seeking to change system, change community, then you're allowing that you're just sitting in someone else's imagination. But also, how do you then connect to people's imagination, maybe help them to see more expansively what the future can look like
Hmm.
as part of what that shift is? I was talking to Senator Mendes from Rhode Island in December. We were talking about activism and like politics and having a conversation around you can't move people to action if you're not connecting in some way to their imagination for them to be able to how does that loop into this grander vision of what we're working toward and for people to see their role in it. So I think the way that you're kind of working in that sphere, that makes a lot of sense, but also that's how we think about creating community-wide and systems-wide change.
Hmm. Hmm. And really focusing on community, focusing on people. I I didn't know how much I needed community until I started working to build more community. Uh, it's amazing, especially in like in an increasingly digital world and in a world that is still kind of feeling the effects of being socially distanced. It's amazing to bring people together and to make a space, to take space, to reclaim space for just being together, for just let me recognize your humanity and let me provide a space for us to sing and dance and laugh and let me give that to children. Let me provide a space for kids to see all of that as well. And it's been an amazing journey, and it's given me as an individual something that I didn't even know I needed. So I'm community has filled me in a way that I never imagined.
I find that whether it's through the work we've done with Unknown Project, which is focused in Louisville, Kentucky right now, or some of our other collaborations, that the work, when community is taking ownership of it and actually claiming it as they're a co-creator in it, that is when you really get to see the power of change that it can have. And
Mm-hmm.
when I look at, I've seen some of the videos of the performances and community events you all have hosted, and if that really seems to be embodied in what I see in terms of the nature in which people see ownership in it.
Absolutely. And not just the artists that we work with, but the grandmas come out an hour before we start and they set up their chairs and they're always offering to help, like, you need anything? And Summersall, he lives next door to me. He always comes out and he power washes the sidewalk before we activate and make sure like we have a space to activate. The businesses around have kind of galvanized and they all publicize what we do and they offer support. The restaurant across the street, they feed our artists. Everybody sees the benefit in what we do and everybody wants to play a part. Everybody wants to contribute. And without prompting, without asking, that to me is kind of the magical thing. Everybody's like, okay, this is how we do community, and everybody is participating in doing community.
And I wonder if, as especially over the past few years, I don't know what COVID in particular, 2020 to 20 to now, but the past 3 years, I know that for me, it really impacted, like I had to re-examine what I value and how I prioritize my time. It impacted how much energy I have to be in person with people. I'm extroverted, but I'm less extroverted now. And so just kind of there's a reconciling of how have we as humans evolved and how do we then as organizers kind of bring that conversation into the spaces where we are,
Hmm.
because in many ways we're meeting or engaging with different people, new people, people who have adapted in a lot of ways. And so I wonder, just kind of, I'll try to bring it full circle and then however you want to interpret it is great. Getting back to that conversation around what does it look like to live with less fear or uncovering who we are. I'd love to know what the intersection of the past few years and that internal work for you has looked like.
I think it's been struggle, and I wish I could say something else, but I can't. I will say that I'm hopeful. Some of the work I do as a producer like I said before, I'm thankful, and I think it's made it easier in a lot of ways that a lot of the work that I've done as a performer has been with other Black and Brown folk. Some of the work that I do as a producer in working with other organizations is with white organizations and white dominant organizations. And that is a different, everybody is trying to do better. Or the organizations that I've worked with, they're trying to do better. But sometimes it just does not translate. Sometimes it's a struggle when dealing with organizations that have for generations been white led, and that have excluded Black and Brown folks. So we're in this period of time where there's an immense amount of friction, but I don't think that that's a bad thing, because in order for there to be friction, in order for there to be conflict, we recognize that there's a problem. We just don't know how to fix it just yet. And everybody is in this period of messing it up, but we have to mess it up in order to eventually get it right. So I'm hopeful that in this process we will continue to do this. We will continue to butt heads. We will continue to be in a point of possible conflict and tension in an effort to one day resolve it, in an effort to be on the other side of the conflict eventually. Hopefully it won't be so long from now, but we're just, you know what I mean? It's struggle. It's struggle. Even in seeing how Broadway has changed and how this last season of shows that got produced on Broadway, everybody's in this period of, and everybody, I feel like white dominant institutions are at this point of being reactionary without necessarily taking the moment to think about, okay, how can we instill long-lasting, impactful change, as opposed to what's the quickest thing we can do that's going to address this problem that may not actually address this problem, but optically it's going to seem like we're addressing this problem, but it's not going to actually change. For instance, it's not going to actually, we're not going to actually make our executives diverse. We're going to continue with the same executives, the same white patriarchal system that we've been in for generations, the same system that we were founded under. Instead of making those institutional changes, I feel like a lot of organizations are putting these performative band-aids on things. So, and Black artists and Black creatives and accomplices are holding those institutions accountable. So we're in a period of this. We're in a period of conflict. But I'm hopeful that in being in the conflict, we recognize the problem and we will continue to try, even if that means we butt heads, even if that means we fail, because eventually we'll do better. That was a long-winded way of saying it's challenging. It's challenging. It's challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really interesting as we've come out of, or especially after all of the protests for racial justice in 2020, and you saw appointment of C-suite DEI leaders, you saw the public-facing statements, but across the board, either those positions are being eliminated or they're not being resourced, and the public-facing statements aren't aligning with the experience of the people within the company. So yeah, that continued friction of how are we holding people accountable. We have a lot of work still ahead.
We have work to do. Also, like in what you were speaking about, we're appointing, we have these DEI initiatives, and even those companies that are appointing more Black and Brown folk, they're quote allowing Black and Brown folks to be at their table. What is the point of my being at the table if I'm not properly resourced? If I don't have the same opportunity and the same resources as my white counterpart, why am I here? Am I actually going to be able to implement change? No, I'm not. If I'm not given the same toolbox, what do you expect me to do? So, yeah, we got some work to do. But I'm hopeful. I am hopeful. I have never, people are trying and people are being held accountable. And I think as long as people like you and I continue to hold those institutions accountable, there will be change. I think it's going to take time, but I think it's coming.
I do too. I absolutely agree that I do think it's coming. Like I said, we have a lot of work ahead, but it's reassuring when you can find the accomplices, when you can find the people who are imagining something different and actively working toward it, and kind of understanding all of the different ways that they're making that change happen, and then kind of thinking about what is the intersection of all of these strategies and approaches people have with the specific organizations you interact with, and how can you best leverage that. I think is really important. You mentioned working actively with different organizations in kind of a producer role, and I'd love to hear just an example, or kind of what does that role look like for you, and how are you intersecting with these organizations to help move that change forward?
Most recently, the Soapbox Presents, we actually last Saturday, so what day are we on? 3 days ago, we presented at Lincoln Center as a part of Afropunk's Black Herstory Festival. So that was one partnership that we had with both Afropunk and Lincoln Center. Coming up, we have a partnership with Symphony Space in April, and then we'll have another partnership with the Apollo in May. Previously, I have curated, and the Soapbox Presents has been a part of executing a Juneteenth celebration with other organizations down in Greenwich, which is not a predominantly Black or brown area. I will say, with all of the partnerships that we have executed, I learned so much about being a leader. I expand so much in my leadership by working with other organizations, because it always proves to be challenging. But maybe that's to be expected as you are coming into an organization with your own way of doing things, and they have their own way of doing things. And so you're having to reconcile the two. So maybe that's just inherent in a partnership. I am, I don't know how best to put it. Cautious, I guess I would say I am cautiously optimistic that I will continue to expand and grow in my leadership as we execute more and more partnerships. They have taught me quite a bit, though. I don't know if that's answering your question.
It does. It does. Yeah, it's always interesting just to think about how many different ways you can whether it's collaborating to host the event, whether it's doing the work behind the scenes with the leadership team to say, like, here's our view, here's how we're stepping into this work.
Yeah.
And then kind of finding or talking through or getting to what does that shared set of values look like, or that shared vision? How do we want to put this on together? And every time that, whether it's diversity and inclusion work or different community-based projects that we've worked on, it's like every time you learn a new facet, a new tool, a different approach, because people are so varied, and the way that they step into these conversations is.
And maybe that's what it is. It's the approach. It's also knowing when to walk away, knowing when to accept a partnership. It's also knowing when to hold people accountable. Like, you say you value community, then show me you value community. Don't just say you value community. Please don't come to me and offer me a budget of $500 and then tell me for a full activation, which includes 8 people, and then tell me that you value Black and brown artists. It doesn't work that way. Show me that you value Black and brown artists by offering me a budget that is workable, by offering me a budget that is fair, by recognizing both in word and in funding our value. Your words are one thing, but the artists that I work with, they can't pay rent with your words. You know what I mean? If you value what we do, then show me that you value what we do. And if you're not willing to do that, sometimes I just got to walk away. You know what I mean? Sometimes if you are not willing to. One thing that I love about how we have executed partnerships thus far, every partnership that we have executed, I insist that it upholds the mission of the Soapbox Presents, the mission of our organization. We value community first, and we value Black and brown artists, which to me, those are one and the same, because in order to support community, you have to support its artists. That's just what that is, especially in a city like New York. New York is its artist, period. I'm very proud of our ability to stand on our mission and to say, and to walk away when we feel like that mission is not met. You know what I mean? Like you have to know when to. Every partnership is isn't for you. Everything that glitters is not gold. You have to know when to walk away.
Yeah, that's a really important point. We had a large corporation come to the table, and they're like, "Oh yes, we would love to sponsor a gnome project,
Mm.
and here's the amount that we're willing to contribute." And it was 20 to 30 times less than what the need was. And there was already a not an active, like there was already some additional work that we thought they needed to do. And so
Yeah,
we were like, appreciate you coming to the table. Why don't you invest that money in this work that is really important as part of your core work? And then
right,
let's reevaluate when you're at a place to view this work as valuable in a different way.
right. It's
And
also that. It's also knowing that corporations are coming to you with a different intention now. So we're also in this period of as founders, as leads of organizations where you have to be hopefully optimistic or hopefully skeptical even. You have to question their intentions, which is a sad thing to say, but you have to. Otherwise, they're going to use you because of your placement in community.
all that to say, we've got a lot to grapple with, but it's exciting. It's exciting to have you as part of our network, to have these different folks doing this work that we can learn from, share with, support, and kind of think about how do we actively and collectively move all of this work forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even just being in conversation with, being in community with organizations like you and with you, like it's filling, it's helpful because you understand, you as a founder and an organizer, you understand the perspective of another organizer. So I thank you for that.
Well, before we wrap up our time today, is there anything that we haven't hit on connected? We've covered a lot, which I've loved. So anything connected to covering or the work, holding people accountable, this kind of broader question of uncovering your value that you want to hit on before we end our time together?
I don't think so. I think I would just say I actively work in my personal life as outside of being an artist, outside of being a producer. I actively work daily to uncover, to be myself in my fullness as a Black woman as I navigate the world, and to know what that is, to better understand what that is. But I think it's something that is will always be active for me. It's something that will always be a process of uncovering. Uh, and I look forward to the me that is tomorrow, or the me that will be 5 years from now, or the me that will be 10 years from now, and my understanding, that person's understanding of womanhood and Blackness, which I know is going to be different than this person's understanding of womanhood and Blackness. It's always a process, and I am excited by the process.
I'm excited by the process too. And I think even when I look back, you mentioned earlier, not as a younger person, not having the language to name some of what you were experiencing. And as I have looked back 10 to 12 years, like professional career time, and having different language to talk about and to even analyze myself, what I went through, why I changed things about myself to fit in, what does the future look like? Having access to that has been so helpful. So thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. It's been really wonderful. Before we wrap up, where can people learn more about your work, including the Soapbox Presents?
Yes, we are on Instagram at the Soapbox Presents. You can find out all about our upcoming events. We have an amazing season of community activations planned. Our first one starts May 20th, and I am so excited about this season. It'll be large-scale music events, smaller music events, spoken word, and dance-oriented events this season. So I'm looking forward to bringing that to community.
If I'm able to find my way there, dream one of those. I hope I can participate in one. But
Yep.
I cannot wait for future conversations and to see how your work and our collective work can positively impact community.
Thank you very much for having me. This has been a great conversation.
For listeners, if you're interested in learning more about the topic of covering, delving into my Uncovering Your Value newsletter, or getting in touch to share your story or about public speaking, you can visit joshmiller.ventures or connect with me on LinkedIn. And you can find more episodes of the Inclusion Catalyst podcast across platforms and by visiting inclusioncatalyst.com. I can't wait to see where this journey takes you and hope these conversations inspire you to take bold steps to explore new frontiers and to create a more inclusive world through action. Have a great one.